these steps.
Is it recording?
It's recording. All right, here we go.
Many of the most important historical sites in the world are ruins. The Parthenon, Petra, the pyramids, Machu Picchu, Angkor Wat, Chichen Itza, the Colosseum. Many of these ruins are considered must-sees for tourists and are cherished and protected by the countries that claim them. And you could see why. Ruins, especially the ones I mentioned, are marvels of engineering, of culture, of power. They evince profound, sometimes religious beauty. They provide us revelation and the reminder that humans have existed long before us, that we are not separate from history, but part of it. For the Romantics, ruins evoked the sublime and served to embody the power of nature over architecture, culture, and even ourselves. Ruins are also critical, contested sites of contemporary meaning and power. They are not just rubble to be protected, they are active sites shaping political dialogue and national myth. Jean Baudrillard wrote that ruins become, quote, holy relics that provide a fantasy of authenticity that help us to organize and reorganize our worlds. Today, I want to look at these holy relics to understand how they have interacted with political and cultural narratives and how their meaning can become charged. First up is the neoclassicists. In 1709, an Italian worker began digging a hole for a well near a rural monastery. Instead of water, though, he discovered an ancient city of marble called Hercules City, or Herculaneum. Over the next 30 years, Herculaneum would be revealed, an ancient city preserved by volcanic ash, full of beautiful Greco-Roman wall paintings and classical architectural motifs. The discovery of these ancient ruins would have a profound impact on both the artistic and political discourse of a new class of elites who challenged the traditions of the monarchy and the church. Young elites from Europe would visit Herculaneum as part of their grand tour, taking home some of the artifacts to be displayed in their estates as sign of both power and taste. New parents began naming their children Brutus, Solon, and Lycurgus, and the art of the time began to reflect a renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman themes. In an era where the Baroque was the prevailing artistic style, the classical ruins of Herculaneum felt, by contrast, simple, clean, minimalistic. The neoclassicists began to paint in a more reserved, clear, and serious style, reviving the aesthetic of the classics. It was a way to differentiate themselves from the Baroque, which, in all its intricacy and radiating lines, embodied the absolute power of the church and the monarchy. If Baroque was the aesthetic of old institutions of power, then neoclassical would be the aesthetic of the new institutions. Many neoclassical thinkers, from Jacques-Louis David to Thomas Jefferson, saw themselves as the rightful heirs to the virtues of classical Greece and Rome. Elites as far away as Russia and Britain began making claims to this classical past. Eventually, the craze made its way to the United States, where leaders of the revolution sought to connect the legacy of Rome and Greece to the American project. It's why there's a sculpture of George Washington looking like this. It's why he's portrayed at the top of the Capitol building looking like this. And in fact, it's why Washington, D.C. is littered with buildings that are copies of Roman and Greek ruins.
Look where I am. They built a replica of the Parthenon, or Pantheon or something, in Nashville, and it's kind of weird and silly. So I checked that out.
With the neoclassical movement, we see history being excavated, literally, and injected into contemporary discourse. But the art that was created was more about the idea of the classic than the actual thing. Many of the sculptural and architectural reproductions were, for example, white. This was because by the time Europeans had discovered some of these ruins, their original color had faded, so architects just assumed the buildings had always been white. And all of the archaeological sites at this point were in Italy, since Greece at the time was ruled by the rival Ottomans. The neoclassicists, of course, overlooked these nuances, gently fabricating elements of the past to support their claims about the present. The entire neoclassical movement was based on a particular memory of the ancient past. That memory was of a people driven by virtue, honor, and self-sacrifice, of rulers who were always just and noble, of cities that were beautiful and orderly, and you can see how that memory overlooks the corruption and flaws of these ancient civilizations, but you can also see how that memory is deeply impactful. We continually seek a historical golden age to absolve our problems. The neoclassicists were dismayed by the corrupt monarchs and religious leaders of their time, so they found a ruin that could support a vision for the future that felt historical and right. And so we too may be dismayed by our contemporary political discourse and seek virtues in the past we believe to be truer and more eternal. Those old ruins then map the future. They become sacred objects of meaning for future generations, the same way a childhood photo might be so valuable to you now, or how a photo from today might be valuable to you in 20 years. The process of that memory, of that nostalgia, on both a personal level and a societal level, are, as we know, subject to a little selective memory, a little bit of forgetting. We fill the gaps, we exaggerate, we imagine the past as something fully formed and authentic that might give us the key to understanding our present. Like Baudrillard says, ruins are like holy relics, and they help us to organize and reorganize our world. It's okay that we maybe exaggerate the past sometimes, but we should be careful of distortions upon that memory, especially when that memory is being controlled by those hungry for power. And that brings us to Spanish California. California is home to a huge array of architectural styles, but one style in particular has captured the imagination of gas stations, universities, and Bel Air mansions all over. And that's Spanish colonial. California was colonized by the Spanish in the 17th century, and they spread their civilization like a virus across the state. One of the most popular vectors for that civilization were missions, where Spanish soldiers and friars coerced the local native population into slave labor, all while converting them, against their will, to Catholicism, one of the best and most awesome religions of all time. The tale of Spanish California, no matter how you cut it, is an undeniably violent history. Yet missions, the site of so much suffering, are some of the most important and well-preserved ruins in the entire state. The Spanish eventually lost California to Mexico, which ruled over the territory for only about 25 years. The United States, which at this point was absolutely possessed with visions of manifest destiny, went to war with Mexico and acquired the lands of what is now California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. These lands had then passed from a long period of Spanish rule to a short period of independent Mexican rule to a new period of American rule. And the ruins of Spain's colony here were initially looked upon as essentially garbage. Americans saw the Spanish as brutal Catholic colonizers. Today we consider all colonizers to be on some level brutal, but Americans and Protestant Westerners more generally subscribed to La Leyenda Negra, a myth that portrayed the Catholic Spanish as evil in comparison to the virtuous, civilized Protestant Americans in English. There was no effort to preserve the ruins of Spanishness in California, and most American observers looked upon these ruins with utter contempt. As one author wrote, quote, "It is doubtful that there is any structure on earth colder, barer, uglier, dirtier, less picturesque, less romantic than a California mission." This author went on to call missions, quote, "an architectural leprosy." Gradually, though, that view of the Spanish past and its neglected ruins changed. A popular book called Ramona depicted Native Americans as well-protected innocents who flourished under the benevolent care of Spanish missionaries. Eventually, Spanish California was resurrected in American discourse as a, quote, "idyllic golden age of pious padres, placid Indians, dashing caballeros, and sultry señoritas." This coincided with a movement for mission preservation and restoration. Old missions, like the ruin in Carmel, were restored. A highway linking all of the missions was also built, called El Camino Real, which is now just Highway 101. And perhaps most obviously, mission revival architecture in the Spanish colonial style became hugely influential, copied in houses, hotels, office buildings, and schools across the state. Missions became popular field trip sites for kids and tourist attractions for visitors. The academic analysis of this transformation has focused mostly on the creation of a mission myth. In this myth, hierarchies, imperial violence, class struggle, and racism are all papered over with a pleasant, romantic image of the past. These mission ruins created a kind of classical basis for labor relations, class struggle, and white power in California. For the proponents of this ideology, the ruins of Spanish California were like holy relics. In their worldview, these missions were the sites of a romantic past, an idealized past, a golden age without trouble or violence. evidence that might absolve the problems of the present. And unlike mere historical documentation, physical ruins can make ideologies feel authentic. It's why issues regarding conservation and preservation are always political. They suggest usable pasts that might say something specific about our present. White American settlers sought to connect their actions to the history of a previous colonizer, to justify their continued subjugation of indigenous and Mexican residents, and to construct a civic narrative that made it all feel historical, and therefore inevitable, or just, or right. Through ruins, we commune with the past to say something powerful about the present. Because of this, ruins are not only contested sites of meaning, they're also sites of historical distortion. The most extreme example of this are the fascists. Political leaders in the West have long sought to connect their policies with ancient Greece and Rome. Doing so lent a historical, mythic justification to their actions. The fascists of Europe in the 20th century were no different. Stalin himself, who cared deeply about architecture and its meaning, saw Moscow as the spiritual heir to Rome, despite the fact that the Roman Empire never even reached Moscow. One place that had a more obvious claim to Rome's classical past was Italy itself. The fascists of Italy subscribed to a myth called Romanita, a cult of the Roman past connected to today. A nationalist myth, Romanita served to justify Italy's imperialism as unifying the old boundaries of the Roman Empire, thereby liberating people with the virtue and civility of a classical civilization. Benito Mussolini and his fascist party subscribed to Romanita and sought to create and excavate in Rome a particular image of its golden days. The fascist regime inherited a rich mental image of the ancient city that lay partly ruined amidst Rome's contemporary visible layer and partly submerged and forgotten underneath it. In the centuries since the empire had fallen, Rome had changed. Soil deposits, new settlements, even new ruins, in fact, covered the landscape. One such area where recent development obscured ancient ruins was the site of Circus Maximus, an old Roman stadium and theater. Over hundreds of years, the old structure had deteriorated, and by the 1800s it embodied the city itself, faded, confronted with enormous challenges to modernity, but still deeply historic. Around Circus Maximus was a dense neighborhood of slums consisting of working-class Romans. When Mussolini came to power, however, his notion of Romanita meant uncovering these ancient Roman ruins to materialize his linkage to the past and to connect fascist policy to ancient Rome. To do so, Mussolini displaced the people inhabiting the slums of Circus Maximus and cleared away much of the debris and soil that had covered the ruin. Mussolini then used this excavated ruin as the site for fascist parades, celebrations, and exhibitions. Mussolini cleared the debris of history from the hundreds of years between classical Rome and fascist Italy. In doing so, he sought to link classical Roman history to national Italian history, to his fascist agenda, to his misogyny, to his imperialism, and to his campaigns against political enemies. Mussolini told Italians a story about Italy that made sense to them. We are the heirs of Rome. We are the present-day actors of an ancient, superlative right. We are the chosen ones. Unearthing ruins like Circus Maximus was an active tool of myth-making and power-building that was convincing to his supporters. Ruins are essential, seemingly authentic, pieces of that storytelling. There are plenty more examples of ruins and how they relate to myth-making, storytelling, and power. Maybe one day I'll make another video discussing China and its nationalist archaeology, or Iraq and its appropriation of Assyrian cultural symbols. But for today, we'll stop here, knowing ruins to be both beautiful spectacles worthy of our appreciation and also critical artifacts worthy of our skepticism. Ruins are sites of meaning for artists, for countries, for religions, for regular people. They are also uniquely subject to the distortions of ideology, and we should be suspect of anyone that seeks to connect their actions with some historical golden age. Ultimately, ruins are not just objects of ruin, they are also in ruin, and I much prefer the romantic sentiment that ruins remind us of our own mortality. They remind us that our institutions, our nations, even our dreams will one day be overgrown. The vines and the dirt and the slums will overtake us, will perhaps, hopefully, forget us. Okay, so how about that? There you go. There's a video. I don't really know what the full idea with this is. Yeah, I don't know. This is just kind of like proof of concept. This is like, I had an idea to do something and I was feeling particularly motivated and I decided, better to do it and see how it goes than to never do it at all. So if you watch this, if you made it this far, I like sincerely appreciate it. I'd be curious to hear your feedback, frankly, whether you like it or don't like it, if it feels boring or slow or interesting. I would like to do more of these. I think it's a fun personal project for me, just generally. And this was fun to make. It took a while to make, but it was really fun to make. So yeah, let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. I genuinely appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And yeah, maybe see you next time. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Bye. Have a good day. Enjoy.